nobody is going to solve this problem for you. You must come up with a plan. There's no big decisions in life, even though they feel like it. You just need to keep making small ones to move through.
So Patrick, why don't you take me back to 2008, the financial crisis? Where were you? What happened?
Are you gonna make me do that?
Yeah.
Okay, 2008. I had graduated from my MBA program in 2005. I got a job working in private equity, which was the dream, in emerging markets. And so I was working at a division of AIG, the global insurance company called AIG Capital Partners. I think I was a VP there, sitting on some boards, and I was traveling the world. So my job had me going to Turkey, to Pakistan, to China, and it was a good job. It was the best year financially I'd ever had actually at that point.
Okay. And then the financial crisis hits. What happened to your role? Why don't you talk a little bit about the experience you went through over the next, say, 12 months?
Yeah, so the financial crisis came in the fall of 2008. And I'll never forget it because my brother got married in September of 2008. And I went to the wedding and I came back to the city in New York. And I remember flipping on CNBC. And that was the weekend that I believe it was several of the banks were basically going out of business and or merging. Basically, the beginning of the financial crisis really took off in full. And to be honest, I didn't really see how that applied to me because I was like, I work at a private equity firm and it's part of an insurance company. That sucks if you work at a big bank, but that is not me. And then the next morning on Monday, I went into the office and the markets opened and my employer, AIG, our stock started to crash. And you started to see it kind of, if folks paid attention during the Silicon Valley thing, the Silicon Valley Bank thing, or, if you remember this time, it's like every day or every couple hours, a new bank would be under pressure and the stock would crash. And so I watched as over the next several days, AIG stock swooned and fell. Ended up falling. I had stock in the company that I bought. It fell like 97%. So it was crazy. And it kind of rocked my world because I was like, I'm working at one of the largest companies in the world and yet somehow we're now worthless. And so in the end, over a period of time, it was I think it was a couple weeks maybe. It's all kind of a blur. The government stepped in. AIG was taken over by the government. Our stock was worth nothing. We then became the government came in and said how much we could be paid. I mean, it was crazy stuff. And I didn't care so much about that, I guess. I thought it was kind of weird, but I couldn't control that. But I just remember thinking, okay, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and yet somehow I'm working for a failed business that people are going to be protesting outside our building and all this sort of stuff. And that's kind of what happened. Over the next couple months, then, there was that immediate shock, kind of bomb was dropped. And then there was the picking up the pieces. And that was stuff like the government being our employer. We couldn't get our bonuses. I mean, people would be really mad. The taxpayers had bailed out the company. Why should they give us anything? And then people protesting us and, feeling like your resume has got a stain on it and all this stuff. And I just thought this will be okay. We'll get sold. And, it took over a year. We were eventually sold to somebody who I was not that psyched about. But in the period that it took, I watched the indecision, the stasis, the paralysis of all the people I work with. I watched our business go way downhill, all of our companies. It was a disaster. And I just felt so trapped and depressed to the point where I ended up getting really sick due to all the stress. I ended up on a heart monitor at one point. And it was just everything crashed. AIG crashed, the stock market crashed, and my whole life crashed.
Yeah, you were living the dream, and then you're like, what happened? And so what happened after that? So on a heart monitor, not doing well personally. What changed?
So first of all, and I mean, the whole thing, the thing that I look back on and I'm like, why did I do this to myself? Is I felt deeply ashamed. I felt ashamed of the failure of the company and its reflection upon me. I felt ashamed that I ended up getting sick from that. I felt like I had done something wrong. And I tried to hide it. So I didn't tell anybody. I was really unwell. And I was going to doctors. I had this crazy mystery virus. We don't even know what it was. It was essentially what COVID felt like, except I had it for months. until I got better. And I just remember it was crazy because I was 3 months after that, I went away for the New Year's. I was in the UK, and I remember like my vision was so blurry that I couldn't like read a book. And I just was like, but I was sort of just like plugging along like, well, it'll get better. And had been told by my doctors, like, you just have to take care of yourself, right? And so I decided, I remember like I got back from Christmas vacation and I was like, well, I can't really read anything. My eyesight's terrible. Our company is screwed. There's no way out of this. And I sort of just sat back and felt bad for myself. And it was like, I did everything right, and yet I'm in this terrible position. So what changed? I think what changed was one day I just woke up after I was physically feeling a bit better. And I said to myself, nobody is going to solve this problem for you. You're like that frog in the water, the infamous frog. You're getting boiled. You must come up with a plan. That was the big moment. It was like this inflection point where I was like, I got to figure out how to get out of this.
What kind of plan? I imagine the industry you were working in, not a ton of jobs. So just kind of like, I'll do the same thing, different company.
I tried
That's like the easiest thing probably. So maybe you spent some time on that, but like, how did you go from that? And we'll get into later what you're doing now, but like, how did you come up with the plan? What were the first steps, and how did that evolve over time?
So I had two kind of buckets that I had to focus on. Bucket number one was like well-being, kind of like all of the, sort of what I call HQ or health quotient. It's like being able to physically and mentally push forward. And that was kind of the first bit. So I was like, I need to like figure out what's going on with me physically. I started to feel better. And then I got really into running. And I started running like 40 miles a week and lost like 20 pounds and was just very focused on healthy lifestyle with the idea that to make any change, it's really helpful to be physically strong. And physical strength can oftentimes be helpful in mental strength as well. So that was like a process and I was kind of checked out at work. So I would like leave at 2 p.m. and go like run on the treadmill for an hour. And I just became very obsessed with that. And that was great because it gave me something to put my energy into and my frustration into. On the other part, I remember I spent a decent amount of time feeling embittered and frustrated with the situation, like, oh, our bosses are failing us and everybody's just complaining. And I really felt like, what should I do about that? So as you said, the first thing I did was I went and interviewed with, similar type companies to mine. And what I realized, number one, is that there wasn't that much out there. And number two is actually, I kind of had a secular shift in how I thought. And it was like, this is not for me anymore. I don't want to do this again. I'd been at another financial firm that kind of blew up. And I was like, I've done this twice now where I went to some finance thing and it ended up going downhill. And I'm kind of over this. Like, it's too much crap. So I started to, when I would walk into other firms, I'd be like, well, this place is probably going to blow up anyway. And so I wanted out and I wanted a different model. The problem was I just had no idea what that model would look like. And so what I decided to do is I sort of stepped back and I was like, okay, how much money have I saved? And I'd saved and saved. So I was always great about saving. And then like, what do I need right now? And I realized that I was just super, super burned out mentally and that I needed to just like separate myself from that environment. And so I decided to take a sabbatical. But I did something which I look back now and I'm like, this was brilliant. And I encourage everybody to do this, which is I didn't just like, I tried to quit and I had a lot of leverage because I was like, a valued team member. And so I quit at a moment where we were about to be sold as a company. And so I was able to then arrange to basically, like for a period of time, kind of help as a consultant and see through some of the things I was doing. And so I was able to be like a solutions provider for my old firm and still be part of the team and help them with things that they couldn't replace me for while being able to step away and have more flexibility. And I stayed on as a consultant for a period of time. So it was a really great, elegant outcome that benefited everybody and gave me a softer landing into like trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next.
Yeah. How long did you end up consulting to them for?
Oh, a couple of years. Yeah. I ended up. It was wonderful. It was a huge benefit. And I kept learning and doing the parts of my job that I loved. And at the same time, I had more flexibility because I did these things, but then I had I had left. And what I did in terms of sabbatical was, so I left my job in March of 2010. And it was remember 2010 was a World Cup year. And I ended up, my brother took me to lunch in New York, and he was like, "What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. I'll look for a job or I'll figure it out." And he said, "You should get up every day for 6 months, not knowing what you're going to do that day." And I thought, you are so crazy. He's a musician. I was like, oh, you look at the artist with his little plan. I couldn't do that. Who does that, right? And then I kind of did that. So I ended up watching every game of the World Cup. I ended up just getting up and having unstructured days where it's like I sometimes go meet people. It's not that I wasn't thinking about the future, but I just didn't make plans per se.
Yeah, let's schedule out every hour of the day. We're just like, maybe I have one thing to do tomorrow,
Precisely.
And then I'll find something that seems interesting to do with the rest of the time.
Exactly. I spent a bunch of time learning French. I went to Paris. I spent part of the summer in Barcelona. And then I came back, and after about 6 months, I had this realization, which was my brother had a very strong idea, which was like I had deprogrammed myself from the structure that I put into my life, or that had been put into my life, the structure that killed my creativity, that made me, just made me bitter and angry. I used to be you knew me a little bit, but I was definitely crankier. And I just tried to remove all of those strictures so that I would have the open mind and the space to think about what I wanted to do after.
How can somebody get themselves into a situation like that? I'm thinking about, there's one of Cal Newport's earlier books on Be So Good They Can't Ignore You. So it's if you have a role that's hey, I'm very important at the company, then you can say, hey, I want to work from home these days, or I want to do this a little bit differently, or I'd like to work remotely for a little while. So I think just listening to you, that was really important. I think obviously it's impossible to dream and think big and do something new if your health is off. And so I think I'm totally in agreement on that. And I've gone through some transitions in terms of times when I didn't focus on that, wasn't in a good place, not the best time to be making big future plans, and you just kind of want to, just do the bare minimum, which I don't think is good. But how can, and the other thing I guess that comes to mind is that I feel like how you describe yourself, it sounds like a lot of people's lives today of they're oh, my job, oh, this, oh, the whatever it happens to be. And how did you kind of take control? Obviously, the financial piece is really important too. Of you saved a bunch of money, which that then allowed you to be I'm just going to get up and watch the World Cup and do this. Where I think that obviously gives you tons of flexibility if you can be smart about that. So, I mean, for somebody that identified with how you were feeling, what would be the process for somebody that maybe doesn't have the same financial crisis that happened, or a huge kind of night and day change and shift, but how to push somebody forward and taking action on what they're doing, what they'd like to do.
So this is the thing that's kind of interesting. All of the story sounds like I had such a great plan. These things I didn't see the path. I mean, I sort of made it work, but now I can look back and say, and I advise people on these things all the time. So this is replicable in many different ways. I'm not saying you're going to get the same deal that I did. You might get a better one, you might get a worse one. Every career is different. Your level of leverage is different. And so I would say, if somebody is sitting there and saying boy, I'm really unhappy right now and I want to have some of that. First of all, the first thing is figure out where and if you have leverage. And a lot of people don't realize they have leverage, but do you do something special that your company needs, that if you were to leave tomorrow, because you could probably leave tomorrow or 2 weeks notice or whatever, would really cause some pain? Do you have relationships that are valuable? Is there an external event? I was kind of helped by the fact that my firm was being sold, and so they wanted to keep people. And so that gave me a little bit of, they were more open to a flexible arrangement. They were listen, we can't, we're trying to sell this company, we need to make sure the business is properly cared for, and if we have a lot of turnover, that's bad for us. So how do we work with folks, which was great. I mean, that's a responsible way to run a business, right? So if you're good, if you have great internal relationships, That's all good. That's number one, is think about your leverage point. Number two is don't fall into the trap of thinking too small. So I think I had a lack of imagination. Like, it didn't even occur to me actually to do this until my boss suggested it. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. That solves all my problems, man. And he was like, good, solves my problems too. And so
the consulting gig was his idea.
Yeah. Because he was like, you know, I was like, we worked very closely together. If I left, he would have to pick up the slack for me. And I think that would have been a lot of strain on him when he was focused on other things. So like, he was super cool that way, and I give him a lot of credit. But I think that maybe your boss won't do that, but being really open-minded and flexible and creative and being willing to throw out ideas. Like, I was talking to somebody today over lunch who is thinking about leaving their job, and I was like, they were thinking it's an either or, and I was like, there's no either ors. Like, maybe there are, but generally it's like there's always opportunity to do a intermediate kind of thing, especially when you're more senior in your career.
How do you think somebody that maybe doesn't feel like they have that leverage? So one of the things of people that work for me or giving advice to people is like, how can you make your boss's life easier? I think might be a way to think about it too, of like, maybe they don't feel like they have leverage now, but if over the next 6 to 12 months, they can end up taking over a couple of the roles that their boss currently handles, or something kind of maybe it's like, not give your 2 weeks notice now, but if you don't feel like you have leverage, there's ways of putting together your own plan of like, how could I have leverage? How could I be more important to my employer, which could help you stay and change your role if you wanted, or it could give you, you know, help in terms of the flexibility that you're talking about too.
So there are there are ways to do this that are like more aggressive, or like, you know, I'm not going to say morally questionable, because I don't think it's morally questionable, but like, for example, say your firm is organizing a conference and you are the pinpoint person on this conference and you're doing everything and you're the only one who really knows where the bodies are buried. You have leverage that you're not going to have after the conference. So the question is, how are you going to use that leverage, right? If you're in charge of some big important project that needs to be delivered and you're really consequential to its being delivered, then for a period of time you have more leverage. If you have a great relationship with people on your team, that's a source of leverage. It's not like leverage of like you're blackmailing the leverage. It's like leverage of like they understand you. There's a bunch of different ways to build leverage. But I think what people fail to do sometimes is to realize they have leverage and then use it, or communicate that they have leverage to the other side. And so I'm not saying you want to, again, hold a gun to somebody's head, but you know, you could say to them like, listen, I'm really unhappy and I need to make a change. I also know that we have this thing coming up that I'm in charge of. And so I'd like to think through with you how we can come up with an arrangement that will still make sure you get everything you need while still giving me things that I would need. You know, I mean, that's like a very generalistic way of saying that, but I think that helps. The other thing is, and this isn't situational, this is more generalistic, but the thing that I see people do that I find very self-limiting is that they have that employee mindset. Like when somebody's all like, you know, I'm going to pick like a bank, not because I'm picking on a bank, but say they work at like Goldman Sachs, and like they just tell you over and over again, every sentence is like Goldman Sachs this and that or whatever. I want to say to them, like, why are you shilling somebody else's brand? Like the only brand that you should be giving a flying one about is your brand. You know, you're not some company person. And I think that was one thing, like when early in my career, I was just so proud to work at JP Morgan, like yippee skippy JP Morgan. I thought it was so great. It's a wonderful company and I'm glad that it's on my CV, but it doesn't define who I am. As I moved up in my career, and I've seen this so much with really successful people, they move all the time. Like you never stay at one company your entire life. So as a result, one should be like by design, always putting their own personal brand first and letting companies be of service to them, not the other way around. And if you do that, then you always have more leverage than you've ever had before.
Yeah. And then so you think in terms of sticking around a job too long, or because that I saw with like my roommates when I first moved to New York, some worked at hotels. Like Michigan State has a good hospitality business program. And so one of my roommates like jumped around from hotel to hotel working in sales. And the thing with that is that like you're always kind of getting your value, and people are paying you for that. But if on the other hand, if you're like just going to stick with the job forever, and they're like, they're not going to leave, we don't really need to give them a big raise. And so I think that's another way of kind of testing the market sometimes too, of like, okay, I've kind of learned as much as I can here. Let's see if I can do something slightly different within the company. Maybe I should move somewhere else, and kind of pushing their career forward, even if the people they're working for aren't doing that for them.
Yeah, the saddest person is like, not the saddest, but a sad case is that person who like did the company person thing. It's like that classical story of like, it's like that guy in Office Space, the dude with the stapler, who's like, he's been there forever. He's going to stick around, and he just keeps on getting passed over or screwed. And like, so one day they just fire you. And it's like, you had all the signs. You could have, in many different ways, diversified yourself and focused on investing more in yourself, but you put yourself second to the organization that you're a part of. That is no longer a way of building a career. It probably never was, but that is certainly not the way today.
So obviously there's like start a personal brand and start a podcast, and there's all sorts of things like that. I don't think that that's necessarily for everybody, but how could they, in a more corporate job, stand out personally, as opposed to just selling like, oh, I'm working at JP Morgan, or I have this particular job. How can somebody do something like that?
Yeah, that's okay. So that's by the way, you hit an awesome point, which is that people, okay, so what I'm not saying, I'm not saying not to, but the advice I'm giving right now isn't you need to have a podcast and you need to like be out there, with your newsletter and your Substack and your like blah, 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 because like, I do that stuff, but like, you don't have to do that. And many people don't want to. And frankly, like not everybody can have a Substack and a podcast, for goodness sake. Well, they can now because of AI, but they shouldn't necessarily. But what I'm saying is a little different. What I'm saying is, if you're working at JP Morgan, you're still working there, you're going to talk about the brand. But like when you walk into the room at any event, do people think there's Jeff, he's an expert in this thing and a really smart person who's really well connected, who could go anywhere they want and be successful? Or do they say, oh, there's Jeff, he works at JP Morgan?
Yeah.
Totally different thing.
The JP Morgan rep showed up.
Yeah.
That they could replace with any other person next week.
And so what does that mean? So let's put a little bit more meat around the bones. So how does Jeff become known as that person? Probably what he's doing is, number one, he's out there meeting with a bunch of people, but not just hiding behind their corporate brand, but like adding value with his own thoughts and ideas. Number two is he's speaking on panels, and he doesn't start every sentence with, well, at JP Morgan. Do you know what I mean? He's like more positioning like, here's what I think. And, just making sure that he's centering the message around his sort of value and his leadership. And number three is he might be doing stuff online, like LinkedIn and stuff. Like I'm always amazed. I have these friends, lovely people, and they wait until they're the CEO to do anything online. And then they feel like they have to be thought leaders. And I'm like, you could have done this the whole time along because you're smart, and like, just like write a couple posts, put it out there, put your ideas out there. There is such a vacuum and there's such a lack of original thought out there that if you write a half decent post on LinkedIn, people will just fall all over themselves and they will remember that post.
Yeah, I was just talking to a couple like recent college grads who have like larger YouTube channels, and they're like, they've gotten so much work from LinkedIn. They were just like, just put a few things up there and we get, clients for doing video editing. And so it's like someone in college, just out of college, I think there's a lot of value there. And if it's, here's my 5 takeaways from an event that I attended, or whatever it happens to be, or I went to this meetup on Thursday night, here's 5 things I learned, and tagged a couple of people that were speaking. Yes. And then all of a sudden you're like, they're promoting you that were, because they saw you speak somewhere. And so it's like you share that and they're reaching a new audience. So it's something that, you don't necessarily have to do the Substack email list, all of this stuff. But the thing I end up doing a lot of times is like, it's easier for me to talk through ideas. So if you went to an event and you just talked to AI and said, here's the 5 things that I was thinking about, like help me reformulate this into a LinkedIn post, let's say.
Totally.
And then you're like, okay, with a few minutes of me just babbling about what I learned, I have something to share and get that out there. And then people are recognizing that you have some individual thoughts versus just be employee number 235 at whatever that company is.
I totally agree with that. And I'd also say, like, just like as a mental model, I had a friend from grad school who, when we graduated, there was this newsletter in my private equity industry called the PE Week Wire or something like that. And everybody read it. It was like 50,000 people got it. It was everybody in the industry. And this guy, David, he worked at some firm, and he somehow volunteered or got chosen or did like some guest posts on that. And so he get his name out there as somebody, writing about the industry in front of 50,000 people pretty frequently. And it made him in the world of private equity, it doesn't take a lot to be a celebrity. Do you know what I mean? Like, so he'd go to meetings, people are like, are you that guy who writes that thing? And he's like, yeah. And, so like I started writing. I used to write a column for the Latin American Venture Capital Association newsletter. And every time I wrote it, like random people who I hadn't spoken to in years would be like, I read your column, it was really smart. And so it built credibility, and people are like, oh, that guy's smart. He has a point of view, right? And I think that these days with Gen AI, of course, like there's so much crap and a lot of content is just useless. But like, if you can, it's good it can help, obviously. I use it too. But having a point of view, that is something that people will be attracted to.
And how do you feel about working for free? So for an example like that of like, yeah, I'll write for this, or I'll do something that can kind of steer me into a different direction.
What a topic. Oh my God. You know who hates that? My parents. My parents, like I'd be doing stuff, because like, especially in the speaking career, when you start doing speaking, like, part of what I do in my career is paid speaking, and it takes time. Like nobody's paying you real money day one unless you're an Olympian or something. But in the beginning, like in that part of my journey, it's like, okay, in the beginning, you were begging to speak anywhere. Like, oh, hey, can I speak on your panel at like some event?
And then can I get the recording of it so that I can make myself look important?
And then if you keep at it and you get known a little bit, then it's like people will invite you to stuff and you can speak. And then after that, then there's a period of time where people will fly you places. They won't pay you, but they'll be like, hey, do you want to go to like Bora Bora? I don't know, random places. And then you might do that or you might not, depending. And then they'll start paying you a tiny little bit of money to do something. Like we'll pay you $500. And you're like, okay, well, that's better than free. And then over time, if things go the right way, then you can increase those numbers, and it's quite interesting. So what does that all mean? I remember in the beginning when I was doing the free stuff, my dad, God bless you, Dad, I'm not picking on you, but would just be like, why are you doing that? And I was like, Dad, because like I need to just, get my name out there and get in the right places and whatever. And so he didn't get that, and I would get annoyed. That being said, what I have seen and what I have learned is like, one can get into a bad pattern of doing too many things for free. Only do something for free if you really think it's going to move the needle, or you're going to learn something, or you're going to get an asset out of it. I see friends of mine that like start a business and they're just giving their shit away for free, excuse my language, and they can't move off of free. And so being very well aware, because like say for example, you're a coach, right? Well, coaching, like what should that cost? I mean, whatever the person's willing to pay you. I see friends who start coaching companies that are like, I'll give you 3 sessions for free. Well, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of your time. And assuming you're charging some reasonable rate, that's a lot of value. And so I would encourage people to experiment with free, but don't think free is like a fixed thing, because you oftentimes anchor yourself way too low when you start out with free.
Yeah, get 5 testimonials and then start charging.
Yeah, get something
that's like
in
a deadline for that of like, hey, I'll do this, but here's my later goal. But if I do a good job, can I get a testimonial? Yeah,
generally my lived experience has been when I ask for more money, nobody says no. Like every time I remember, like, again, it's like with different things that I've done in my career, it's like I remember being very uncomfortable asking for more money, but I would do it. And I've never had anybody say no. I might have said, hey, can we negotiate that? But generally I just get what I ask for. And so then I'm like, damn it, I've been undercharging this whole time.
Yeah, that's the worst. If somebody, you put a price out there and they're like, yep, let's get going.
Yeah, no, really? Wow, I thought it'd be more. Oh, I'm sorry. That was pesos. Or the other way around.
And then so for somebody who's thinking about doing their own thing, you have a book, The 10% Entrepreneur. So, we talked about you having 6 months of just get up with no plans. that's really scary for a lot of people. So for somebody who isn't ready to quit their job and start something, how would you recommend someone to do it in a lower risk way?
By the way, the first 6 months were the amazing ones. And what happens is like the beginning of month 7, when you're like, I still have no clue, that's when it starts to feel scary. For me anyway, the first 6 months I was just on a dopamine high of the freedom. It was so lovely.
Well, so if you have the opportunity, would you rather do something full time and not have to juggle things? Or do you think, like, when would you do something on the side versus like, this deserves all my attention if I'm going to really do a good job with this? Yeah,
it's a really good question. Like, listen, if some company wanted me to be their CEO, obviously that needs to do that full time, right? Mm-hmm. And if I think if you're, the beauty of doing a couple different things is that if one of them really takes off and you feel great about it, then you can recalibrate. Mm-hmm. But for me, the way I've always thought about it is like that, you know, you have some things that you do that are more because they make money. And you have other things you do because you enjoy them or because you think that they have other values or you think they will make money. And having a mix of things works for me. I really like that. What I would say in terms of if you don't want to quit your job, which I super get, by the way, it's pretty crazy. And it's what I advocate. Don't quit your day job. And then talk about this, the 10% entrepreneur is like, how do you use side projects? My notion of entrepreneurship is much more broad than like what they teach at Harvard Business School or Wharton, where for me, being an entrepreneur could be being an angel investor. It could be being an advisor to a company and trading your time for some shares in that business. It could be starting it on the side. Like this notion that entrepreneur means quit your job, raise venture capital, and try to build a unicorn. It's very, it's very limiting. And frankly, I think that it's a very closed view of what entrepreneurship is.
And then obviously with AI too, it's like you can build your own app and you can 100%. Create content and there's all these other things that you can do where you don't necessarily even need somebody else's money.
Yeah, and do you need to build $1 billion business? No, like if you build a bunch of apps and they all make 50K and you have 25 of them, like you're very rich. So AI is also a game changer for this entire concept. But I guess my whole point is what I'm asking people to do is shift their conception of what it means to be an entrepreneur, doing things that are much more flexible and lighter touch, and you can do those whilst having a full-time job if you want.
Okay, so what would be ideas that you'd have right now? So I know you do you have quite a few different things in terms of like advisory work, you have your podcast, like how does somebody get started? Obviously some of those require you to do things during business hours, which is much more difficult to do if you have another job versus things that are nights and weekends. But like how could somebody get started on something on their own?
So investing as an angel investor, you can do whenever you want. I mean, that's the kind of thing you meet somebody at over the weekend, it's, a birthday party, and then they're telling you they're starting something and you learn about it and you decide you're interested and you invest. So, a lot of people do that. That is not a particularly, esoteric kind of behavior. It does require capital to invest. Being an advisor is similar, except you don't give money, you give your time. And that could be something like, hey, maybe you work in marketing and your friend from school is starting a new company and they need help with the logo and they need to figure out what the branding is and they want to think about the channels and stuff, and you know how to do all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll do it for free. I can do it nights and weekends, be a little bit flexible, and I'll work for equity.
Now, the other one is your friend who says, hey, I'm starting this company and I want you to join. But, and you say, well, that's nice, but like you don't have any money to pay me. And they say, okay, fine, do it part-time in the evenings and weekends. And then when we raise money, I'll hire you. That's kind of another form of doing this. Get some stock in the meantime as a co-founder. And then there's kind of things you run on your own. So there's plenty of people who have started businesses on the side. Like there's a really nice one that I love. It's a company called Stonewall Kitchen, which it makes jams, right? It's delicious. It's from Maine, where I'm from. And the founders started it. They made jam in their kitchen and they sold it at the farmer's market on Saturday. Everybody can do that. You can be working a real job.
A couple $100 in ingredients, some jars, a logo, good to go.
And then exactly, they did it every weekend. What happened was that they started to get people who love their product and more and more and more. And then they eventually had enough traction that they got the confidence to go out and start the business. And people do that all the time. And so like, it sounds scary, but when you step back and think about it, it's actually less scary than going full. Like say the Stonewall Kitchen founders had quit their jobs before they had even like made their first batch of jam. That'd be crazy, right? So they had enough traction that when they decided to go all in, they were in a great position to be able to succeed.
Yeah, I have friends, YouTube friends that are similar. So they had their day job and they're like, all right, I'm making X amount now. If I just multiply those hours by full-time hours, okay, I think give me a couple months and I'll be back to the situation I was in previously. So that's something of, what can I do that gives me flexibility, create a YouTube channel or something like that. I've recorded a bunch of videos at midnight, 1 a.m., whatever happens to be that, you could easily have a day job and build an audience and then figure out.
And then you need to figure out the other thing. This is the thing that's like so interesting is that you see people who, and it's better if you've been doing it part-time because you kind of have more data, but there's always these stories I would read about like the corporate lawyer who wanted to own a restaurant. And so they go and do that. And then they're working at that restaurant. And you know what you do when you work at a restaurant? You work your butt off. And you're not getting paid generally. So you're like, okay, so I used to work my butt off as a corporate lawyer, but I made like some ungodly sum of money. And now I work as hard or harder, and I'm barely making any money and barely getting by. And they were like, what have I done? I've seen this a million times. I've
been there.
I know. It's not to put it on you, but you started a company that you worked really hard on. It wasn't succeeding. And that's not a good feeling.
Yeah. And then what advice for somebody that just sits on their hands? They have tons of ideas or want to start a business, want to start a podcast, want to be a digital nomad, want to be something. Like I feel like I meet a lot of people who are just in this analysis phase. And so they have something they're thinking about doing, but how to pick something and move forward. When's the right time to do more research and when's the point in time to take action?
Yeah, so there's a concept that I invented alongside of FOMO, which is FOBO, fear of a better option. That's the idea that when we have plenty of acceptable options in front of us, we still struggle to choose just one. And it could be that somebody has FOBO because they're like, well, I don't know what I should do. Should I do the podcast or should I start the cookie company or should I do this, whatever. It could be. And there's solutions for that. It also could be, and I see this a lot, it's like, entrepreneurship is like a great thing to talk about. And when you don't actually have to do it, it's kind of fun. Like, it's kind of like, it's like, hey, we should start a company. And they want to talk about, but like the minute you go from fun little idea to actually having to do something, it's a whole different shift and it requires commitment and sticking with it and some investment of time and money and all the other things and rejection, because entrepreneurship is, if anything, it's about rejection. And so these are people who like, instead of talking about baseball, they like to talk about starting companies and they probably will never start anything. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like it's not hurting anybody. But if you're not one of those people and you're like, no, I really do want to start. I think the most kind of easiest way to do this actually, like the one little hack that makes it really easy, find a co-founder. Find a co-founder, somebody who, is committed, who's going to hold you accountable. Because like largely people don't do things because there's no accountability. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So find somebody to hold you accountable. Have deadlines, have things that you're supposed to do that they're supposed to do. Like I've been amazed. Like when I started things with co-founders, like I am so much more, because I'm like an obligations driven person. So like I way better about doing what I'm supposed to do. It's a super big unlock. So that would be where I would start because that's the one that I can think of that's like most powerful.
You could post something publicly too, or start telling people on this date. So, for example, with this podcast, so I was waiting until I had 5 interviews. You're the fifth one.
Am I?
But just it was a couple of days ago. I was just like publishing November 1st. Well done. And so it was like, here's the date. It's happening regardless of what happens. And so that I think is another way of to start telling people that something's happening. If you don't have, then there's 5 people that at least you've put the words out there. They're not there's no real repercussions of if we push that a couple days or I don't do it. But if you start telling people, it at least
it's accountability.
Solidifies
You're creating
the idea
accountability. Yeah, it's external accountability. But I think that's huge for a lot of, it is for me.
Yeah. So if you can convince someone else that it's a good idea, that's another sign of like, hey, I found this other person that's interested in the idea. This isn't just some stupid idea that should just stick in my head. So both of us like it. Having accountability, moving forward, I think is a good thing. When should someone? I think one of the things is like maybe some of somebody's happiness is the fact that they maybe shouldn't be hanging on the idea of being an entrepreneur. Of like, I want to do this, and you keep kind of convincing yourself when really maybe the idea is that maybe you should just double down on your career and entrepreneurship isn't for you, and like holding on to these like potential better options out there when really if you just, center your attention on just really kicking ass at what you're doing during the day, like when would you recommend someone to just like for their own contentment, happiness, to just be like, it's better to just, have one horse and focus there?
I think if somebody is feeling that way and hasn't acted upon it, that's an interesting situation because like it's easy to pine to be an entrepreneur, but like it's not like being an entrepreneur is all that fun either, by the way. Like it's really hard. I mean, it's awesome, don't get me wrong. I love it, but it has real benefits to it, but it also brings tons of new challenges and a lot of uncertainty. I think that's the thing about entrepreneurship that's such a killer, is just like the lack of visibility. So like, yeah, maybe you hate your job, but like I can tell you what you're gonna get paid next month. It's like pretty fixed. Whereas in entrepreneurship, like who knows, for a long time until you sort of figure out and get some traction and stuff like that, or you fail. And so if somebody is saying, oh, I really want to be an entrepreneur, has taken no steps towards it, and has no good idea and hasn't really made any progress, like then it just feels like it's a bit more of a escapist kind of tactic to like feel like maybe they're generating options to escape from the job they hate, when probably a better use of that person's time would to be think about like, what do I like about my job? What do I do well about my job? How do I focus on, where do I take that? Because it might be that you are supposed to be an entrepreneur. Like I'm not here to say no, but it may not be the right moment for you. When it's the right moment, you will know. Like I don't see people getting dragged into entrepreneurship. Like they figure it out, they do it. And then they figure out if it's going to succeed or not, and they move on. But like, sitting around and crying about it's this FOMO, really. It's like you're crying about the life that you think you want, but yet you're not, go do it or don't. But like staying in that intermediate place is just a bunch of swirl that you're creating for yourself. So I don't have a super amount of like, I have compassion, but I also think it's like kind of wasteful.
The hell yes or no. So if there's not something that you must do, I'm like, nobody's going to start this business unless I do it. And they're like, okay, that's probably
that's
an
been
idea.
my experience.
Move forward.
When it's like with the FOMO stuff, when the FOMO stuff happened for me and like it came out of the woodwork, I was like, this is it. Like I've been waiting for you. Like there you are. It's like, let's go. And I think I had tried all these other. I remember I had a friend who like we get together every week and we try to brainstorm, and we had terrible ideas. And we would try to do them, and I was like, I do not want to work on this thing. But I would do it because like I felt like I should. And then when it came time to my stuff, I was just like, I could do this all day long. You know what I mean? This makes me happy. I feel like I know what I'm supposed to do. I don't have all the answers. I got to figure it out. But like I kind of get up and I'm like, okay, I get this. This is my baby. So I think that's what happens with great entrepreneurs is like they build something and they just kind of like it's in their wheelhouse, and so they can build it. And I see a lot of times entrepreneurs who are building something they don't care about and they're trying to solve a problem they don't love, they end up failing.
Yeah. A should versus a must. Like I should be an entrepreneur. My friends are being entrepreneurs. It's a cool thing to do versus like I must do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to feel, it sounds so like woo-woo. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to down. It's not nice to say woo-woo, I was told. Like somebody's like, Patrick, don't criticize woo-woo. So it sounds a little metaphysical, but it has to feel authentic to you. And I hate the word authentic, genuine. But I have seen so many people start companies that were just purely based on like some like financial engineering or whatever. And maybe they make money, don't get me wrong. Maybe they love money so much and that is the outcome that they want. And so generating money is the real dream. But for most entrepreneurs that that I admire. Like there's something more. There's something at the emotional level. Because like when when it's like Saturday morning and you'd rather be sleeping in, but you have to get up and sell your jam, you need something to get you out of bed.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot like the fear of missing out with that. Like I should be doing this. My friends are doing this. I'm going to be the only person with the day job. What is the advice for somebody that's, feels that they're being left behind?
Yeah. So what is FOMO? FOMO is two forces, right? If we think about the psychological construct of FOMO. One is what I call aspirational FOMO. It's like, I want more, I want better, I want to maximize, I want to live a better life, I want to be cooler, richer, whatever it is for you that you want. It's the perception that something will get you there. And then the second part is what I call herd FOMO or normative FOMO, which is like, everybody's doing this thing but me. And I don't want to be left behind. I don't want to be the only one who doesn't love their job and isn't building something and stuff like that. The entrepreneurship one is more about aspirational FOMO. Like, I don't think as many people feel the herd FOMO part. It's not like, maybe in Silicon Valley, it's like everybody's doing an AI startup and I'm not, and I'm a failure. But in general, I think that the aspirational element of entrepreneurship is the one that is more compelling. It's like, you're going to be the master of your own domain and you're going to be rich and you're going to be, all these things. And when we see that, what one has to remember is that dopamine hit that is produced is based on perception, right? The perception that you're going to get all these things, but you have no idea. You haven't done it. And so the job of the person who's suffering the FOMO is to demystify that and fill in the blanks. Like, okay, fine. Like, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? What would your life look like? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? What would you have to do? And the more that you replace the fear and the anxiety with facts, the better you are positioned to make a rational decision rather than an emotional decision about what you should or should not be doing, right? It's like, I ran the marathon, New York City Marathon. Why did I do that? Well, I saw the marathon and I loved it. I was so blown away. And so I decided to run it. And then I didn't just go and run it the next day. That would be insane. I didn't even sign up. Instead, I started training for a 5K and a 10K and a half and all that sort of stuff until I realized, like, oh, I really like running. So like the marathon is something I would actually really enjoy, like regardless of the dopamine hit of having seen it go by.
Yeah, with FOMO, I think the other thing too, what you were talking about at the very beginning of this, of like having the runway to be able to take 6 months off, let's say. And I think being in a city like New York, where there's something to do every single day of the week, you could easily, regardless of how much money you make, just spend all of that. So in terms of FOMO and money, what advice do you have?
Yeah. Well, you really need to be ready in terms of your finances. You need to, okay, so I got this advice that was at the time I didn't really want to hear the advice, but it was so good. It's a friend of mine called Pablo Larguilla. He's from Argentina. And he said to me, Patrick, the worst thing that can happen is to be living out of your savings. You're working or you're trying to build something and you just watch every month the balance goes down because you're making no money. I found that really difficult. And so as a result, I never got in that position. I always had money coming in the door. And so maybe you're just post-second, your parents are really rich and you can do whatever the hell you want. And if you are, like, God bless you. But for the rest of us, but you probably don't want to because, like that's also a bad look. They'll probably be like, what the hell are they doing? But have a plan to either raise capital or to make money or whatever. Or if you are going to take time off and not make any money, have a really good sense of how you're going to get the money flowing again when you're ready to move back into, the next phase of life. But I have seen too many people who quit their job and then time goes by and they don't generate any money and they're living like normal or whatever. And then they realize like, oh my God, I am screwed. It's awful. And then, it really cuts the amount of options you have. And so you just want to plan backwards to avoid that as much as possible.
I'm thinking even more for just someone in their day job. It's a matter of like the fact that you could take 6 months off was because you weren't out doing bottle service
I
in
mean,
New
I was
York and
having a good time,
but like within reason of like, here's how much money I make
saved.
and here's what I can do. And so I can go out a couple times a week or
Yes.
having some thought in terms of here's the fun that I can have and not be missing out. And then here's the times where maybe I should be more frugal.
You know, I'm lucky because I was raised in Maine. And so I know the value of $1. And that sounds so old school, but like literally like I just, for example, you know, I went to Washington the other day and there's 2 trains, the Acela train, which is like 30 minutes faster, and the slow train. And the difference was the slow train was $55 and the Acela was like $250. I would never spend the $250 ever. My 30 minutes, I am happy to just save that money. And so I think it's a lot of small, like I buy coffee out. I'm not one of these people who's like, make coffee at home. No, I don't do that. But like I try to think about, I mean, I was never a person who did like a ton of budgeting or whatever, but I just make small decisions every day about like, is this thing worth it to me versus like being able to put it in the bank? And of course you save over time with compounds and stuff like that. You know, I put my 401, like I don't manage my money, like I have it in a 401k, Fidelity does it, whatever. But like just set up the system so that you can put money into it and somebody takes care of it, unless you love personal investing. But I think it's about when you're younger and earlier in your career, try to save as much as you can, because at that point you don't really like, your expenses will get, your taste will get more expensive over time. So when you're younger, you don't mind as much cutting back, and nor do your friends. You guys are all trying to sort of save. And I think it's good to like begin those processes early. I remember, it's funny, like when I worked, my job before business school, it was at JP Morgan, and like we had lavish spending accounts, and like I had very expensive tastes. And then when I worked at AIG, their culture was very cheap. And they were like, every dollar we spent was on our corporate cards was like scrutinized. And it's funny because like I didn't mind that. I actually thought like that's pretty good value, and that's a kind of a good thing to learn. And so I stayed at fine places, but like I never wasted their money. And so as a result, when I went and worked for myself, I also valued my own money, and that was really helpful.
That's very good. So for someone who's looking to change, do something new, you have a podcast. Are there any episodes, people you've interviewed that maybe come to mind in terms of who maybe, so what conversations would be interesting for them?
Yes. Oh boy. Okay. So I'll give you.
Or explain your podcast first, then if there's anything comes.
It's called FOMO Sapiens, and it's a show for turning FOMO into focus. Like, how do we figure out what we want to do in a world with so much opportunity? And those are the guests that I have. So there's 2 podcasts with the same guest that are like one of my favorites. His name is Bruce Feiler. He wrote 2 books. One's called the first one is called Life is in the Transitions. The second one is called The Search. They're both about navigating life transitions. The Search is about how to build a career in a post-job world. So that one's a banger. Love it. I love the founder of Tom's, Blake Mycoskie. His is really good. I had this is kind of a deep cut, but she's so good. Her name is Sukhinder Singh Cassidy. She was actually the CEO of StubHub. She wrote a book about, the essential point of the book was like, there's no big decisions in life, even though they feel like it. You just need to keep making small ones to move through. I thought she was really exceptional. Those would be the ones. Diego Saez-Gil, who is somebody I believe you know as well.
Yeah, I've met him.
He came on a double episode all about his journey as an entrepreneur. That's like a really good one. And then there's another one I'll throw, another kind of a deep cut, but this guy Mike Ott, who is a guy who worked at a hedge fund. He dove into a lake and broke his neck and became paralyzed, and was totally and completely paralyzed, a quadriplegic for like 4 months. And slowly has regained his ability to do everything. Like he beat me at squash. Not that I'm partially because I'm not very good, but still he beat me. The point is the guy couldn't walk and he beat me, and by a lot. But he, like, his lessons about that are, you know, the way he sees the world is wonderful and very powerful.
And besides the podcast, where can people learn more about your books and the other things you're working on?
So the books are The 10% Entrepreneur and Fear of Missing Out. You can find everything at patrickmcginnis.com. That'll take you through to LinkedIn and Instagram, which is where I put a lot of stuff, but also YouTube. All of my podcast episodes are on YouTube now. That's new. Yay. And I'm also on TikTok, but I think the really meaty stuff is YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and of course, patrickmcginnis.com.
Amazing. Thanks for joining me today, Patrick.
My pleasure.